Thank you, Hiram, for that introduction. Good morning and good day, everyone. Good evening to wherever you are. Thank you, Neo4j and Nodes, for providing me with this opportunity. It's my absolute honor to be presenting my work on knowledge graphs. My name is Amna. I am an academic at School of Computing in Past National University of Computer and Emerging Sciences here in Islamabad, Pakistan. At the same time, I'm currently a principal AI research engineer at CureMD Healthcare, and I will be presenting to you my research that I've been doing in collaboration with CureMD Healthcare. The team that has been working with me on this project is our Chief Scientific Officer, Dr. Mudassir Farooq, at CureMD, Ms. Hania. She's the Senior AI Research Engineer, and also assisting me in this work were my research assistants, a couple of them, Uzair and Fatma. So the agenda for today's presentation for me would be, first of all, I'm going to introduce the Medical Mind product and vision for CureMD, the research goals and motivation. And then I'm going to jump into talking about the design and construction of the knowledge graph part of this bigger, larger project, in which particularly I'm going to talk about the semantic annotation of the cancer phenotypes. And then I'm going to talk about the particular use case, which is the focus of this presentation, which is the semantic cohort builder. I'm going to sum up my presentation with talking about the contributions Medical Mind is already making in the field of medical AI, and I'm going to sum up with some future directions that we have planned. So CureMD is a leading provider of innovative health information systems. It's one of the top 5 best medical practice management software companies with over 32 specialties in primarily over 3,500 plus outpatient facilities across the US. And the data, as you can see, is spanning across millions, 24 million as of now that we speak. So Medical Mind is a product of CureMD with the vision to transform value-based care, in particular for oncology using AI. So the challenge that Medical Mind set out to achieve was to be able to predict chemotherapy treatment failure, predict the time to treatment failure, and then assist oncologists, clinicians in being able to make better decisions, provide better value-based care, and also be able to provide explanations for those predictions. So the Medical Mind architecture consists of a lakehouse and there are several feature engineering pipelines, including a knowledge engineering pipeline, on top of which inference engine has been built with an explainability model. So if I were to sum this layered architecture, the lakehouse is the foundation, and then everything else builds on top of it. And I'm going to be focusing on this knowledge engineering pipeline, in which we provided for ontology-based annotation of clinical notes, and then we developed a knowledge graph for oncology. We started out with oncology, but now we are already expanding to other diseases. So what were some of the goals for this knowledge graph? We wanted to primarily use knowledge graph as means of integrating and unifying the very distributed and the disparate sources of medical data. And the goal was to be able to semantically search over that data. And in order to do that, we had to design semantic annotation workflows to be able to extract important information for the particular cancer types. And then once we were done developing the knowledge graph, we were able to develop a cohort retrieval system that I'm going to talk about. And then we evaluated the system using queries, and I'm going to do some experimental demonstration as well. So if we were to look at the overall architecture for this knowledge graph decision support system, you can say, if you notice, these are all the sources of data that we have. So doctor notes, radiology reports, clinical reports, medical histories of the patients, the EMR, EHR data, on top of which we have this semantic annotation and extraction pipeline, from which we then go on to construct the graph that we have designed a schema for. And then on top of which we build the semantic cohort builder. that is then connected via APIs to structured criteria builders and visualizations. So talking about the knowledge graph construction, in our data bank, we had over 85,000 oncology patients that we were able to bring in to the knowledge graph, 89,000 to be exact. And the data that we brought into the knowledge graph was taken from structured, semi-structured, unstructured sources. And then we also enhanced this graph with biomedical ontology and taxonomies. So I'm going to now talk about how we went about annotating these unstructured notes. So particularly, we wanted to focus on the specific phenotypes for the specific cancers. So we, if I were to talk a bit more about the motivation, when doing any kind of work with cancers, there's some vital information such as the staging of the cancer, the TNM staging to be specific, which includes tumor sizes, the node information, whether the cancer has metastasized or not. All of that is really vital information. And within the data, within the records, especially the structured records, there was no specific cancer type information available for us. To give you a perspective, only 3 to 4% patients had any records with this information. And most of this information was embedded within the provider notes, which is basically unstructured data. And if we were to just estimate the cost of this annotation effort, if we were to have oncologists employed and do this effort, it's quite an investment. If you notice the numbers on the screen, going up to 80 million, and it's a very, very time-consuming process. So the goal was to have this automated annotation process where we could just take the patient notes, feed them into some sort of an annotation pipeline, extract the useful information, and then feed it to the graphs. In our case, we started out with simple data-driven graphs, and then we augmented them with the ontologies. So the annotation process that we adopted involved some form of pre-processing, and then we used the NCBO annotator to extract some raw annotations, and then we employed some named entity disambiguation. We refined the annotations and then applied feature extractions for the machine learning modules as well. So to give some more detail about this process, this is how the note is viewed or edited by a doctor. And this is how it is available to us in the data tables. And once we extract that data from the table, this is what it looks like. And once we apply some pre-processing, this is how the note goes. So going further, as I said, that we use the NCBO's bioportal annotator. Basically, National Cancer Institute provides a thesaurus, which is like an ontology which can be used for annotation. So that's what we employed. So we started going about annotating the different terms which were relevant for us within those notes. So to give some examples, we were focusing on the tumor size. So for instance, if this is the note statement such as June 19th, and over here you can see some important information about the mass, and then the size. So the location of the tumor, the size of the tumor, and then the spatial information as well. So this is the information that gets extracted. Similarly, what aspect, what spatial aspect, and these are then related to all of the different parts, the anatomical structures that are available to us in the ontology. Then the next important information is about the staging. So the disease stage qualifier is very important in terms of what stage the cancer is in. Then the grade of the cancer, what grade is going to be labeled for the cancer, and then the TNM staging. So all of this information, which is usually available in the notes, is extracted. Then there are specific cancer biomarkers which are also available in the notes, and we try to identify the maximum possible. in terms of, so for instance, positive or negative mutations could be inferred from these biomarkers. And then another important aspect of cancer phenotypes was the Gleason scores. And so this extraction mechanism was put in place. Last but not the least, there was also the cancer type. So in particular for the lung cancer. So initially we were focused on 5 cancer types, and all of this information was extracted for these 5. In terms of the performance accuracies, we were able to achieve significantly substantial accuracies for all of these, and this was the overall average accuracy in the F1 scores, around 93% or 92%. Once we had these phenotypes extracted, we then went on to develop a simple knowledge graph schema first, which was centered around the patient. And then you can see that the patient has a relationship with the diagnosis, and there are different diagnosis relationships amongst themselves as well. And the scores and the phenotypes were then modeled as well. The chemotherapy plans were also modeled along with the along with the drugs that were part of the plans and the drugs that were administered to the patients. So the knowledge graph schema for us evolved over time. And gradually, once we developed more confidence with working with the graph, we were able to add more information such as the labs, the providers, procedures, even social history, vitals, visit information, and so on. So this was what we were doing with primarily focused on data. But as I mentioned, we already also augmented the knowledge graph using the ontologies. So I'm going to talk about 3 of them. But so you can see that we use the NCIT ontology. So the diseases were linked with the NCIT classes and also the disease codes, the ICD-10 ontology, and then for the drugs we use the GPI codes. So this is another snapshot of how we linked the classes in the NCIT class with the disease information within our data. So there were several semantic relationships that were made use of in terms of broader than, narrower than, synonymous relationships. So this is a drill down view of how we used ontologies. So in Neo4j, it allows you to import ontologies, and that's how we went about it. And then establishing the relationships between different classes, such as related to or similar to. So these were the 3 primary biomedical ontologies that we integrated: the NCIT, ICD-10, and GPI drug classification. And we had to apply some matching and mapping for the NCIT classes in terms of the synonyms and the relationships. These are some of the snapshots of the data that is available to us in the graph. And then once we were done constructing the graph, we were able to run some knowledge graph queries in terms of just inferring different use cases that were relevant for the oncology use cases. So these are just snapshots of some generic queries. For instance, this particular one focuses on a particular diagnosis with a certain tumor size and with a particular, and also trying to view the drugs that were being administered. The next thing that we went on to do for the knowledge graph was we focused on one specific use case, which is the cohort selection use case. And if I were to talk about the significance of cohort selection, we understand that cohort selection is primarily done for clinical trials, and it does remain as one of the most difficult, time-consuming, and expensive aspects of testing new treatments and interventions. So whenever there's a clinical trial that's going to happen, it defines some inclusion and exclusion criteria for patients that ought to be recruited in a particular cohort. And this criteria is often diverse and complex. So what we sought to do was to use knowledge graph as the base for the cohort retrieval, because the selection process is expensive. And EHRs are being used for retrieving information about the potential patients in the cohort, but the simple information retrieval is not sufficient. And why is it challenging? Because records are typically stored on distributed servers, and the data is distributed across the structured, unstructured, and the semi-structured data. And searching is often very inefficient, and it can even be error-prone. So our goal was to use the existing knowledge graph, and then because the knowledge graph is unifying data from all of these sources, it could serve as a very good data bank for the cohort builder. So this is what we built. This was the architecture for the cohort builder, where we obtain clinical trial specifications in natural language, of course, because that's how they're published. And then we translate them onto some structured criteria. In our case, we use JSON for that translation. And then we pass it on to what we built as the cohort builder, where we have a query encoder and a query plan generation. It takes the JSON input and generates Cypher queries. The queries are executed on the knowledge graph, and then cohort is retrieved against those patients which are mapped. Another thing to note is that we had this query engine builder also in place. And the reason for this was that we expected that knowledge graph would evolve. So if the schema of the knowledge graph changes, we invoke this query engine builder, which then generates the query engine dynamically so that the new query plan generation process is in line with the new schema. And also the input to this cohort builder is also mapped to the evolved knowledge graph schema as well. So the query engine that we have developed is completely meant to be supposed to be dynamic, where based on the schema information available in the graph, the query plan is generated using the nodes, relationships, and subqueries are constructed, and then eventually the query execution engine executes the queries. So when we receive the criteria, usually we have inclusion criteria and also exclusion criteria. So the execution is done for both inclusion and exclusion separately, and then the patients are retrieved, and then profiles are retrieved for the cohorts. So this is an example of a clinical trial description, which is available on clinicaltrials.gov. And the study information is available usually, and the criteria appears in this form, where you have some inclusion criteria. For instance, it can be male or female with a certain age, with a particular disease history, and then you have exclusion criteria as well. And sometimes this criteria can be very, very specific. So how this goes is that we have, so for instance, let's say we have this criteria given to us, male patients with group level drug usage, with tumor of size greater than 3 centimeters, and with plans of failed. So from this particular competency scenario, as we call it, we identify the structured attributes that are important to us. And then we encode that using JSON. And then the query builder or the query engine generates a Cypher query corresponding to the JSON input. And then the results are retrieved using the query engine, query execution engine, and the cohort builder. And there's also a patient profile generator, which takes distinct patients and retrieves their profiles. So this was what the cohort builder design looked like. And once we go on to evaluate, we identified some competency scenarios which were in different forms. So for instance, we had range of inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria with combination of conjunctions and disjunctions. And we took some representative competency scenarios, and we checked against the number of patients returned, and we also verified via Cypher queries the results. So these are some of the representative competency scenarios. And initially we had separate graphs for 5 different cancers. And this was how, this was just the number of patients that were retrieved from each of them. Once we were done with this sort of a preliminary evaluation, we then took 5 representative clinical trials from clinicaltrials.gov, and then we extracted and encoded the criteria for these 5 clinical trials, and then we cross-validated. So this was what the criteria for these oncology trials look like. So we took 1 representative trial for breast cancer, then for multiple myeloma, colon cancer, non-small cell lung cancer, and then small cell lung cancer. So as you can see, some of these criteria can be quite complex. It also involves lab results and also exclusion criteria. Could be a list of diseases. So I have this short demo here. You can see that this is how the criteria encoding looks like. So all of these properties are retrieved from the graph, the node labels and the property labels. The values are encoded in JSON. And once the query engine runs, it generates a Cypher query. The query engine runs the Cypher query automatically, but over here, for the demo purposes, I'm just copy pasting the query in the Neo4j browser and just showing you how the results of the patients are retrieved. And then if you zoom in on the patient, you can see the purple node is the patient, and then the green nodes are its encounters. The red nodes are the disease or the diagnosis. And then there are several other relationships with, for instance, the providers, the disease, the biomarkers, and so on. So this is the snapshot of the snapshot of the criteria and the snapshot of the query that was generated. So these were some of the results that we obtained for the 5 cancer types. So we are still in the process of evaluating the performance of these queries. As our graph grows, we are constantly looking into fine-tuning the queries and improving their performance as well. So I would like to talk about some of the ongoing directions as well. So we are still in the process of remodeling and improving the graph. So initially, we did not model the data in our graph temporally. And so that's what we are looking to do now. We are also looking to scale the graph. So we focused initially only on the oncology patients, but now we are trying to expand the graph to all possible diseases. So let's say we have our next target is to grow up to 17 million patients, hopefully. And then another major goal was to improve or refactor the schema of the graph so that we could reduce the patient centrality. So some of the improved modeling decisions that we've taken, we've modeled the encounters temporally with this next relationship in the graph. And then we are also identifying disease-specific and generic information and separating that out as well. We are also providing for more accurate ontology mappings, so separating those out to disease-specific annotations. And then we are also improving relations between drugs and encounters. So this is what our new graph schema looks like that we are currently working on. As you can see that we have the patient and the encounters of the patients, and then we have the condition node, which now captures all the cancer-specific information, only specific to the cancer. And then once we have more information for other diseases and conditions, we expect to model those accordingly. So this schema, we are hoping, is going to be far more scalable and generic. This is an example of the patient journey in the graph, and another snapshot where you can see that these gray nodes are the encounters which are linked, and you can see the information about the diagnosis, the drugs, the plans, and so on. Currently, our graph has over 3 million nodes and over 14 million relationships. And this is what the schematic visualization of the graph looks like. So in terms of knowledge graph contributions, we were able to cash on the advantages of unified and semantic representation on distributed EHR data. And we are utilizing both unstructured medical information in order to capitalize on these use cases. And currently, we are utilizing the knowledge graph for cohort selection, but we do have several other use cases in mind, and graph-based machine learning and graph-based data science efforts are on the way as well. I'm going to conclude my presentation by talking a little bit about, perhaps I'd spend a few minutes about the medical mind product that this knowledge graph is part of, which is basically a patient-centric smart chemotherapy planner, which has made its way from research to product. And this is a way of impacting predictive medicine based on real-world evidence. So the main goal of medical mind is time to predict time to treatment failure using AI-based real-world evidence and EMR data. So oncologists are able to select a plan and maximize value-based care, and be able to extend the quality of life expectancy. Over here, I'm going to play a short video to give you a better perspective on medical mind, and then I'm going to wrap my presentation. So I'm just going to quickly switch to this video, and here we go.
In a world where every second counts, the fight against cancer can be a costly and unpredictable journey. Meet John, a brave patient facing the daunting reality of stage 3 brain cancer diagnosis. He is recommended to undergo a $40,000 chemo plan and bear a copay of $10,000. John faithfully undergoes chemotherapy, enduring the emotional and financial toxicity in his battle against cancer. However, the current treatment proves to be ineffective. John is then prescribed a new 6-month treatment plan, but his health kept worsening day by day. And after 3 months of continuous suffering, he unfortunately passed away. In the depths of despair, a new ray of hope emerges with Dr. Anderson, medical mind developed by QRMD, which presents time to treatment failure using AI technology based on real-world evidence in the EMR data. QRMD Medical Mind helps oncologists to select a plan by maximizing value-based care, giving John hope and vitality. John's journey exemplifies the incredible impact of predictive medicine based on real-world evidence. Medical Mind paves the way for a future where hope conquers even the most formidable challenges.
Right. So about medical mind, as I was saying, I'm going to sum up by talking about how medical mind has made it from a research to product. So as you can see that it's not just knowledge graphs in place, but an entire era of AI-based models, data, methods, models, and explainable model explanations as well. So just to give you one last perspective on the impact. So for instance, Medical Mind is able to provide comparative treatment plans with their treatment failure probabilities, time to treatment failure in terms of days, and the expected life extension. And based on that, it helps analyze even financial strains and allow you to compare relative effectiveness of the treatments with respect to the probability of treatment failure and life extension. And in this way, it's able to add value. It's able to provide value-based patient-centric care. So a short case study, a female patient of 66 years diagnosed with cancer, her past administered drugs, and her planned chemotherapy regimen. Medical Mind is able to answer questions such as whether the chemotherapy is going to be effective or not, From this graph, we can see that with chemotherapy, the life is expected to increase by 3 years and 10 months. The second question it is able to answer is whether the planned chemotherapy is going to suit a patient or not. So what is the treatment failure probability? And what is the survival probability as well? Then it is also able to analyze or provide explanations about what are the important patient features or risk factors that are contributing to the treatment failure. And then it also provides explainable decisions in the form of failure rules, which allows making informed decisions. And last but not the least, it also provides counterfactuals based on mathematical modeling. So if the original failure probability was 73%, what changes in the plan could be made such that the failure probability could be reduced? And not just that, oncologists or patients are able to learn from the real world evidence of other doctors. So Medical Mind provides a learning platform in terms of a very collaborative system where oncologists are able to see what real world evidence is available from other medical doctors' practices and allow for a distributed and collaborative learning and which are explainable and decisions which are explainable and well informed. So to conclude, the oncology EMR at CureMD is started off as AI-based chemotherapy manager. It's patient-centric and provides for value-based care, and it's also responsible and explainable and meets the guidelines for human-centered AI. These are some of the research papers published as part of the work at ASCO and AI Med conferences. And in the future, we are looking to synergize state-of-the-art AI technologies, including provision for natural language processing on top of knowledge graphs or augmenting knowledge graphs using LLMs in addition to machine learning, deep learning models in place. With that, I thank you, and it has been a pleasure presenting this work to you. I'm happy to take any questions. I'm just going to go over the chat, perhaps, to look at some of the questions. So thank you, everyone who's been joining me and watching. And Tobia, there's a question. How were the ontology mappings from the third-party thesaurus? Yes, it was, I would say it was semi-automated. So we did have, as part of the semantic annotation workflow, we had mappings. So we had potential mappings, and then they were verified by experts as well. So Ravi has a question that why to reduce patient centrality. So there's several reasons for this, but primarily to increase the semantic soundness of the graph, I'd say. So for instance, when we have the TNM staging, the TNM stage is attribute of the cancer and cancer is the condition. It's perhaps straightforward if you link it with the patient, but that's not what we wanted in the graph. That's not necessarily semantically coherent. So this was one of the reasons. And another reason was that we wanted to be able to expand it beyond oncology. So for a cancer-specific graph, that would have been all right. But once we move to other chronic diseases or diabetes, then we have other attributes. So it's more semantically coherent to model the condition and then have condition-specific attributes link specifically to that particular entity or node. Champak is asking about literature. Yes, we have a workshop paper that specifically talks about this semantic annotation process. So this particular paper you could refer to. This was earlier this year. This was presented at SEPTA at AIME. So you could refer to that. And all right. I think that's all the questions I see in the chat. And thank you everyone for the appreciation.